Let's begin with the part 2 of Kathopnishad. Here, I will look at the answer that Death gave to Nachiketa to his primal question: what happens after death? Is this the end, or is there something that lives on? Death starts by talking about two paths that people can follow. One is called prayer marg, and the other is called Shreya marg. Prayer, or likable or easy, is the path that death does not really fancy. Death calls it the path of indulgence. It's the path where we are blinded by desire and intoxicated by our indulgences. This is the path where blind are leading blind. And the hope that people have here is that transient things might give them lasting pleasures. Death calls this path the path of avidya, or ignorance. The other path, the noble path, Shreya marg, that is the path of vidya. And death holds this path in a much higher esteem, says that this is something that the wise use their discrimination to choose, because everything that comes to us in this world has got Shreya and prayer mixed together. They always come together. And the wise use their discrimination to choose the Shreya marg. And the Shreya marg, he goes on to describe the path of Vidya, is something that most people don't even hear about. And if they do get to hear about it, most people are unable to understand it. And of the people who do understand it, very few are actually able to follow it. So it has to be um, actually preached by someone who is very wise and has walked that path. And it can only be received by a worthy recipient, and death here calls Nachiketa a worthy recipient because Nachiketa has chosen wisdom over indulgence, because Nachiketa has given up the offer of unlimited indulgences and asked this question instead, the answer to this question instead. And it might be helpful to just take a pause here and think about what is the meaning of these two paths. It will be described in other ways later on, but the fact that these come together, and death calls both these paths bondages. They both lead to bondages, but one is better than the other. The path of indulgence, the prayer mark, is when we are reaching out for things that we feel are going to make us feel better, feel nicer, feel excited, feel stimulated. It is usually a path that comes from gratification of senses or some sort of emotional satisfaction that is immediate. It could be greed, avarice, lust, all those things. And the more literal, more practical sort of day-to-day indulgence as well. When you're sitting at your dinner and you know that probably about halfway through the dinner you are already full, but you keep eating because you are enjoying the process of eating, or you're enjoying the conversation that is happening around you, and you don't stop when you should stop. So that is what death is talking about. These paths come and mesh together. The wise person is conscious of what they are doing and would be able to stop themselves from eating from that point onwards where they know they have had enough. Whereas the person who is indulgent, who is following the prayer mark, is going to continue that dinner till they feel full and bloated and have to struggle later on. So it's very subtle. It's not just deep and radical things. It's moment to moment, everyday actions where these two things come together. You can indulge or you can restrain. The path of restraint is the Shreya mark. The path of indulgence is the prayer mark. Death then goes on to talk about deeper stuff, coming to the answer to the question. It says that in our mind resides an ancient deity in a deep cave in our mind. And the person who finds this deity gets liberated from happiness and sorrow. Okay? Liberated from both. And finds unlimited joy. So, a deep cave in the mind is where an ancient deity lives, and finding this deity liberates you from happiness and sorrow, and gives you unlimited joy. Let's unpack this statement a little bit. And if you want to really unpack it, you have to keep in mind the Mandukya Upanishad that we talked about in the first video, where uh, the four states of consciousness are talked about. The four states of consciousness are, if you remember, the waking consciousness, the dreaming consciousness, the state of consciousness of deep sleep, and the state of turiya, which is similar to deep sleep, but in the state of awareness. So you are awake, but your mind is as relaxed as it would be when you are in deep sleep. So, connecting that with this particular shloka, so here Death is talking about a cave in the mind. Mind is not a physical structure, mind is just our bundle of thoughts. And deep inside it is the kernel of consciousness, which is what Death refers to as the deep cave in which our consciousness lives. And when you connect with the consciousness, you are free from the, the ups and downs of the emotional reactions we have to different things, and you are able to stay connected with that inner sense of peace and joy that we are able to connect with when we are in deep sleep on a daily basis. At this point, in the text is introduced a verse that is talking about Om. That Om is that deity, that Om is the path to that deity. Now, it seems a bit out of place in this whole narrative, and I wonder whether it was added by some enthusiastic scholar at a later stage in a later era, um, because I don't think this is part of the flow of the narrative here. Then Death continues, and this seems to be a continuation of the narrative that was being talked about earlier when he was describing that ancient deity in a cave. Here he says that Atma, introduces the word Atma here, which basically means self. So Atma is unborn, timeless, undying, and other descriptions like that. It is not a cause of anything, and it is causeless itself. So essentially, if you think about it again, using the Mandukya Upanishad example, it is a description of that state of consciousness where the awareness is pure in itself, undifferentiated. There is no thoughts circling around it. It is just an empty space where you are awake and aware. Okay? And then Death goes on to say that this Atma lives on. The body dies, but it does not. So technically, here he has finished answering the question. But he goes on then to describe to Nachiketa how to actually go about connecting with this self, with this awareness. And he says that this is a subjective awareness, it's not objective. It can't be accessed through senses. Okay? And he talks about how to get to it. And you get to it by letting go of unwise actions, by letting go of agitation of your mind, and letting go of stimulation of your senses. Three things, okay? Unwise actions, agitation of mind, stimulation of senses. And these are all the activities that stop you from sleeping. So, if you want to get to the state of relaxation, you have to let go of these three things. Yeah. And we can talk about it more how, and it's a wonderful actually connection, how this connects with the Delphic maxims of know thyself, nothing in excess, and surety brings ruin. Very beautiful connection. And it makes me wonder whether there was more in common than the ancient Greek civilization and our civilization than we have thought about, because it's quite amazing that they have come up with these three things, which are also repeated again and again in Hindu texts. But this is essentially that. So, your actions, your karma, your thoughts, and your senses, all these three have to be in a state of gentle poise, in a state of relaxation, for you to be able to step beyond the mirror of thoughts, the veil of thoughts, and access the pure consciousness itself. If you think about it, this is a model of wellness. It allows you to think that your well-being, your sense of joy, your sense of being connected with everything around you and yourself, to be grounded, to be comfortable, is actually to a large extent independent of the things around you. It is not a matter of worshipping a deity, it's not a matter of benediction from a saint or a sage. It is up to you to walk this path to achieve that stability of your actions, stability of your thoughts, and avoiding the indulgences, and then you get to this state. So this is where this particular section ends, and then death begins the next section, which is actually one of the most beautiful parts in the whole of the Upanishads, in all the Upanishads that I've read. Here, death now describes to Nachiketa the mechanism of mind. A beautiful description. Follow me carefully. There's a chariot with 5 horses. There's a charioteer, there's a passenger. The charioteer is holding the reins, 5 reins that go out to 5 horses, and these 5 horses run on 5 tracks. Okay? So 5 tracks, 5 horses, reins, charioteer, passenger. And this is an analogy for awareness or Atma. This is the passenger. The charioteer is the intellect. The reins are mind. The horses are senses. And the 5 paths that the horses are running on are the particular object for each sense. Beautiful description. Okay, you will never forget this. The passenger, the rider, the charioteer, the 5 reins, the 5 horses, and the 5 paths. It's important to remember that, because you can track it back and track it forward to the Shreya Marg and Preya Marg, and we will think about it again. Okay, so with this, then death goes on to say that if the charioteer, if your intellect is stable and in control of your mind, which then controls your senses, then your body, which is the holder of your sensory apparatus, and your mind, which is the observer, the indulger of the sensory apparatus, it stays on the path that the intellect wants it to go. And if the intellect is letting go of the reins, letting it do its own things, then it basically is attached to the horses, to the senses, and it just follows the senses wherever they want to go, and the chariot goes nowhere. It's just led by the wild horses running all over the place. Okay? It's such a beautiful analogy. And then it goes on to describe how our sense of self is connected to the world out there, and it describes it in these steps of each is better than the other. So senses, and then senses are followed by the perceptions. And here there's a difference between objects of senses and perceptions. Perceptions are placed one step higher than the senses themselves. And that is because we internalize perceptions. So even if the object of the sense is not there, even if a person is not there, in our mind we can talk to them. Even if the food is not there, in our mind we can imagine food and the other objects of sensory gratification. You can use your own imagination to imagine what the various things would be. So the perception, and then higher than the perception is your mind. Higher than the mind here is man. Higher than the mind is the intellect, and higher than the intellect is the awareness itself. And here they divide awareness into 3 layers, which I don't think is relevant to us, but this is the relevant bit: senses, perceptions, mind, intellect, awareness. So this is the path now. Okay, this is the path. It's the same thing with the chariot analogy. Now this is the thing itself. And then death goes on to describe that you can follow this. The natural tendency is to follow this path outwards. The awareness, instead of being aware of itself, is aware of the intellect and the mind and the perceptions and the senses and the things out there. And if you want to achieve a higher state of being, then you have to keep following this path back. So letting go of the objects of senses, of our senses, controlling the senses, then being aware of the perceptions, being aware of the desires of the mind, allowing your intellect to be in control more often than your mind to be in control, more often than your senses to be in control. And as your intellect becomes more and more aware, more and more in control, then you can take a step back from the intellect itself to pure awareness. And this is what then death gives that battle cry, that shloka that became the battle cry for Swami Vivekananda. Okay, so now death says, Uttishta Jagrat Prapya Varan Nibodhat. This is, you have to wake up, you have to get up, you have to go and find wise people, and you have to learn about this thing. And then he says, it's again a very poetic expression. I wish I could speak Sanskrit fluently, but he describes this as the razor path, the path that is like walking on knife's edge. It is impenetrable, it is dangerous, it is risky. And what path is he talking about? Again, the path that we were discussing earlier. The path from inside to outside, from the awareness to the sense objects. That is the prayamar. That is the natural tendency of our mind, of our inner apparatus to go outwards. The path from the path to restrain this natural tendency is the Shreya mark. And with this restraining, it's a very, very delicate task. People who grew up in India would have seen this phrase on all the railway stations, Savdhani Hati Durghatna Gati. And the roads and railway stations have this slogan everywhere. You lose your you become careless and accident. So carelessness causes accidents is that slogan. But uh, in a in on the road or on the railway tracks, carelessness, you can still get away with a few moments of carelessness. But when it comes to watching your mind, a single moment of carelessness and your mind will take you to places where you will not be able to tell even your closest friends where it had gone. And if you can do this experiment, you can try writing down whatever comes to your mind on a piece of paper for 15-20 minutes. Every thought, honestly, you will be you will not be able to share that piece of paper with anyone. You'll have to destroy it. It's the nature of the mind. It is completely wild, and the intellect has to control it for it to be able to function in a healthy way, in a walk on the noble path. So with this, there comes the last shloka of this section, where um, it is as if a purohit, a priest, is doing this, who has been reading this part, now calls upon everyone who is listening and says, this is the noble story of Nachiketa, and we should say it as often as we can, and so on. So after this, the narrative continues in a separate chapter, and that chapter seems added later on, because Nachiketa gets mentioned only twice, and death only once, and uh, it seems to be addressing to someone called Gautam. Gautam may be another name for Nachiketa, but I'm not aware of it. But this part doesn't add much, and it seems a bit of a letdown that after death has given this battle cry and this great proclamation and calling to everyone to come and walk this razor path. Now we are continuing the story as if all that has not happened. Um, nothing new gets added, but there are some beautiful allegories, analogies that you might find interesting if you have an academic disposition, or you like intellectualizing about these things. Uh, One of them I will mention to you. It's quite beautiful, where Death says that the Swayambhu, the way of the way of nature, has designed our senses such that they have been chiseled outwards. So they're designed to look outwards. So that's why they cannot be turned in. So I cannot see the eye. That is, there's no, unless we have mirrors to look at, we actually would not know that we have an eye, because you can see everything with your eye, but you cannot see your eye with your eye. It's and so on. It becomes a very intellectual sort of discussion if you want to go deeper in these things. But the message ends with that call. Death calls upon Nachiketa and upon the listeners to come and try walking on this razor path, to come and to arise and awake, and go and find people who can talk about these things, and understand these things. To be honest, this is a very interesting subject, and once you start looking into it, what you very quickly realize is that um, there is another world that lives within us that we are barely aware of. And there is a lot to be gained from understanding that world. And just to quickly summarize some of the scientific studies around this, that we are living in a very stressful world at the moment, very stressful lives. And when we have to go through periods of stress, there's a part in our brain called amygdala. And that part, sort of in reaction to the stress, becomes bigger in size. Now, you can, by very simple meditation techniques, about 30 minutes a day, mindfulness. I mean, it's as simple as it gets. Mindfulness is the simplest of the meditation techniques. Just watch your mind in action, watch your bodily sensations in action. Don't react, let go to whatever, train yourself to let go to all the thoughts that come up. Just practicing it 30 minutes a day for 4 to 6 weeks shrinks that part of the brain back to its regular size, or, well, shrinks it to a size smaller than it was. And what that means is, even though your circumstances might remain the same, your patterns of stressful reactions become less prominent. So, yeah, that's the death's welcome to all of us, to come and walk this razor path, and find out more about ourselves. Thank you.